All right, everybody. Welcome back to another bonus episode of Cinemaholics. I'm your usual co-host, Will. And once again, joining me for this special edition episode Thingamabobber is our good friend, Corey Woodruff. Hey, Corey.
Hey, Will. We're back at it with another Corey and Will original.
Yeah, I was going to say, usually I give you a more formal introduction, kind of tell the listeners where you're from and all that. But I feel like...
They know.
Well, not only that, but so the movie we're reviewing is a new Judd Apatow joint called The Bubble. It was a Netflix exclusive. I think it did actually premiere in a few theaters nationwide. None of the theaters near me, but it is primarily a streaming exclusive, which is a first for Judd Apatow. This is his sixth feature film, narrative feature, I think. Is it 6th or 8th? So let's see, 40-Year-Old Virgin, Knocked Up, Funny People, This Is 40, Trainwreck, King of Sad Now. So I guess it's 7th feature at this point.
Yeah.
Not counting the documentaries and stuff he's done. And it is pretty widely considered his first major critical flop. I mean, I know a lot of people aren't particularly fond of This Is 40, but I feel like prior to this film, I've been favorable to very favorable on nearly all of Judd Apatow's films. I don't think he's perfect by any means. I certainly have had a lot of criticisms about his work, but I generally give him the benefit of the doubt. Like if I see that there's a film coming out with him or that he directed or maybe even produced, I'd be like, okay, there's something worth pursuing here. Certainly one of the few remaining names in Hollywood as far as like comedy filmmakers who seems to have clout as far as like, oh, if Judd Apatow is attaching his name to this, we should greenlight it or consider it. And I think that clout is starting to fade at this point. I think his kids are starting to kind of gain more cachet, I guess, in the Hollywood business at this point. But that's not to say anything about this film per se, which is a film that I already told you off the air is one that John started to watch for our main review of Cinemaholics and then decided to not finish, which, is something I don't blame him for doing, but it makes it annoying when I've already seen the film and am ready to review it. But thankfully you, Corey, had been watching the film as this was all going down and you offered to join me for this conversation. So I will say thank you for agreeing to discuss this film. Yeah,
no, I'm happy to be here. I think we can all agree that Judd Apatow's had a weird week or so. He's kind of...
So you're referring to the Twitter thing where he responded to Will Smith slapping Chris Rock by saying it could have killed him.
Yes, exactly. Taking a silly, dumb moment that people aren't going to remember in like a month and turning it into one of the grandest overreactions I think I've ever seen on social media. I think because that was probably the very first like major hot take I saw because it was like instant. And then you're just kind of like laughing about it. It's like, oh no, what did he do that for? And then you see that and you're just like, oh no. No, Judd. And then he like kept doubling down on it too. It was just like, come on, man.
And the funny thing about that is that like it wasn't like him being ironic or anything. I think that was a sincere opinion that he had.
It was and it's indeed.
Like, and if that's what he's feeling about Hollywood at the moment, maybe he's not the right guy to be satirizing the industry at this time.
No. It's like this is maybe controversial to say, but it's like, of all the things that happened within that hour, how in the world was Judd Apatow tweeting the most embarrassing thing? Like, how?
I mean, there have been a lot of wild takes from that thing since then, but at the time, maybe that was the most egregious.
That was like the first. That was the first egregious thing. There have been some crazy takes, some really awful, bad, like, come on, people. One dude slapped somebody. Let's not, it's not World War III. But, like, come on. Like, but Judd's was, and again, I love Judd Apatow. Don't get me wrong. Like, he has been, like, at least in the world of, like, the studio comedy, I mean, he really was, like, a kingmaker there for a good 10, 15 years. And made a lot of really great movies and oversaw a lot of really great movies. And it's not fun to be in a position where I'm like actively just like kind of hiding my hands behind my face for something that a director that I really respect is doing. But like The Bubble is definitely not a movie that I would have wanted him to make. And I think it's just a really frustrating step back for someone who had really, I think, found a nice lane to stay in going forward and clearly has not, taken the lessons well of how artists have adapted to the pandemic. And his pandemic pivot was not very good. I will talk about it, I know, but it's definitely one of the most disappointed I've been in a movie recently. It was hard to be disappointed while I was watching it because the movie is so lifeless, but
Sure.
just the fact that like this could have been a cool premise if they had executed it well, and the execution's not there. It's disappointing, particularly like 2 years ago, because I'm a big fan of The King of Staten Island, and
Sure.
I loved that Judd was beginning to like help develop other comics voices, like he did with Amy Schumer, and like taking other people's scripts and just like throwing in his own directorial panache, warts and all. Like, the guy knows how to make a James L. Brooksy type, movie, and we don't get a lot of those anymore, so they're nice to have. And but The Bubble is not that. The Bubble is something else. He's never tried something like this before, and didn't work.
So you had some expectations, I guess, or hopes for the movie going in, because I imagine a lot of people are going to go into this not really having any expectations and just saying like, oh, like Judd Apatow made a new movie. I didn't even know that. It's on Netflix now. Okay, I guess I can watch that. And I don't think it's going to improve the film per se, but I think that might maybe make it more agreeable for some people. But I do agree with you that for me, like, I mean, Judd Apatow, I think he's only made one film I've truly loved, and that was Knocked Up. I think that's probably still his best film. Yeah, but I really do like 4-Year-Old Virgin, Funny People, and I agree with you that I think he was starting to find a new stride with movies like Trainwreck and The King of Staten Island, where he was honing his style, not in the sense that like his films were still overlong, they still kind of meandered a bit, but they felt a little bit more attuned to the sensibilities of the film or the comedians that they were frontlining, and they also felt like he had more of a cinematic language that he was exploring. Like the worlds themselves felt a little bit more vibrant, like visually they were more distinctive than the films he had made prior to that. And so it looked like he was on the right being path, like he was making more interesting films, if not really branching too far from the conventions of his previous films. But sorry, you were going to say something previously.
Well, he really I think he's a stronger producer and curator than he is a director. I think Knocked Up is the only film that he's made that I really feel like you can make very compelling arguments in his direction is part of the reason why it's successful. Like, as much as I enjoy like the quote unquote Judd Apatow film, like, yeah, I mean, like, This Is 40 is fine, and I think Trainwreck is good. But The King of Staten Island was like the first movie he had made himself since Knocked Up that I really loved. And 4-Year-Old Virgin's obviously really good, but I just feel like when I connect myself to Apatow, it's a lot of the work he produced. And I feel like his eye of like scouting new talent, elevating voices, helping those voices kind of tap into themselves, like, I think you can make an argument, and I'm not saying that this is like it, but I think you can make an argument that Judd's comedic sensibilities in his own understanding and what he's able to make are not always as strong as his peers, but he knows how to get the most out of his peers that they probably wouldn't have gotten if he hadn't found it in them. It's weird. It's kind of like a coach on a basketball team where it's like, I don't necessarily want like, Greg Popovich out there trying to like dunk things, but like, but in a very less aggressive sense, like maybe we'll go like Steve Nash with the Brooklyn Nets right now, a former player, probably not the best anymore, but he could play if he had to. But it's like, I want that guy on the bench helping the younger talent like elevate themselves and score points or whatever. So use a sports analogy.
Is Greg Popovich a baseball player right now?
No, he's the coach of the Spurs. He's probably like in his 70s.
Because I grew up with a kid named Greg Popovich, and
did you really?
Yeah, I was confused for a second. I was like, do do you know him? And I was like, why are you throwing him under the rug right now? He seems like a good guy.
How many? There's 2 Greg Popoviches in the world: the guy you grew up with and the coach of the Spurs. So,
I guess so.
Yeah, so they need to meet each other. Just a couple of Popoviches.
But anyway, yeah, I mean, I think I would generally agree with that because I think Knocked Up is my favorite from him because I feel like the overlong narrative is actually to the film's benefit, where that was a film that was the whole intent of it was just like you have like the inciting incident of them getting, as the title says, knocked up, and it's like they kind of have a meet cute in reverse, so it's a little bit more about like the characters getting to know each other after they have known each other in the biblical sense, and it's like that like sense of like that overlong narrative plays the film's benefit because it's like you're kind of living with them in the moment and you're getting to know them better. But I think he took the wrong lessons from that, and that like all of his other films feel like they're just going on way too long. He feels too emboldened, too indulgent to really cut himself back and like let the scenes play sharper and like kind of learn where he needs to rein it back and where some scenes just kind of need to like be a little bit tidier. And so like films like Funny People I think are solid in their own right, but like if that movie was even like 20 minutes shorter, I feel like it would have been a stronger film. And likewise, like as much as I like Trainwreck and King of Staten Island, I feel like those movies would also be stronger if he cut them back by 10 or 15 minutes. I feel like he really just needs to learn to make a 105-minute film, and he keeps producing these 126-minute long films. And so my one hope going into this, because initially it was announced the runtime for this was 105 minutes, like, oh, finally, he made a 105-minute satire. Like, that's maybe not the exact thing I want as far as like the subject matter of the film, but like the runtime suggests that maybe he's finally learning. And then it was later announced that this is also 126 minutes or whatever. And it's just like, gosh dang it. Like,
Judd,
you're falling back to your old tricks. And I feel like this one is probably more egregious than the other ones because
that question.
At least with his other films, they kind of slide into drama to where like you can understand why he lets them run a little bit long. Certainly King of Staten Island, you could argue, is maybe even more of a drama than it is a comedy. And so like the runtime for that film and a few of the recent ones, like you can understand why they kind of go longer than they may need to be or expecting people would hope they would be. But there's no reason why this needs to be longer than 95 minutes or 105 minutes. Like This is just a straightforward, broad Hollywood satire where it has an A-list cast just mucking it up, riffing it up, just trying to make light of a very serious time in our lives. And I think maybe if it was shorter, I'd be a little bit more agreeable towards it, but it just goes on and on and on. And it's hard not to get exhausted by it at a certain point.
Yeah, it's just a very empty movie that doesn't like, it's a movie that's very full of itself for not having any ideas. There is just a vapid sense of like satire that kind of floats over the whole thing where the movie like expects the audience to think that it's already funny. And then it kind of comes in and it's like, oh, you think this is funny. And then you're just like, well, you haven't really done anything, so I'm not really sure to laugh at. And then they'll like throw out an old like COVID joke of like getting your nose swabbed and quarantine and all these things and mixing that into like this like mistakenly self-pronounced sense of profound commentary on the vapid nature of celebrity. And it's a movie that is just so surprisingly full of itself for not having anything going for it. Like it kind of confidently struts in like, we're doing this, but it's like, you're not really doing anything. So I'm not upset. I'm just confused. Like, why are we so confident when your film doesn't do anything? Like, it's kind of like going to an art show and someone like showing you a blank canvas and being like, look at this shit. But it's just like, what? I don't see anything. I'm sorry. I don't see anything. What did you do? It's like, I did it. It's like, oh, okay. That's the bubble. But there's like,
Sure.
there's nothing there.
Yeah. So I guess we should explain that the plot, such as it is, follows a group of actors who are, quarantined in this English hotel because they are making Cliff B6, which is a reference to the Jurassic Park franchise. Certainly, this movie was inspired by the making of the still upcoming Jurassic World Dominion, and how that movie apparently has had a fairly tortured production process because that was one of the first major films to be shot during the pandemic. And so it's trying to basically do the Tropic Thunder thing where it is, making fun of the egos, the eccentricities of movie stars in a situation where they kind of have to like play against their vanity when the what is hitting the fan and everything is just going into flames and all that. And I think that would be fine if, like you said, Judd Apatow had a clear point of view about this time or about actors in Hollywood at the current state of the like IP driven industry. But I don't know if it's just that he's too nice or he doesn't really have something specific that he wants to do, or Netflix wasn't willing to get meaner with it, or if he felt like he couldn't get meaner with it because of the talent involved. But it just seems like you said, like, he doesn't have anything particularly biting to say about it. It feels weirdly sort of toothless for what it's trying to do, because especially considering that none of the actors in this are playing themselves. They're all playing broad, undefined caricatures of other celebrities. Like Pedro Pascal is kind of sort of supposed to be like a Joaquin Phoenix, Casey Affleck type. As I think you mentioned off the air, Keegan-Michael Key is kind of supposed to be somewhere between Will Smith and maybe Jared Leto. Like it's implied that he has like this sort of religious cult, but he also has this like overinflated ego. So it's like maybe like a less talented version of Will Smith, or maybe a more star-driven version of Jared Leto. I'm not exactly sure. And everyone else is kind of fitting into different archetypes. Iris Apatow, Judd Apatow's daughter, is playing this TikTok influencer who's getting into the movie to appeal to Gen Z. And it's just like there's like broad ideas here. I get why they felt like, oh, we can satirize the market by including these type of characters, but there's nothing harmonious about it. Nothing really gels. There's nothing that really sticks because they're just kind of thrown into this green screen room, and it's like, be funny, do funny stuff. Here's a concept, kind of run with it for a few minutes, and we'll figure it out in the edit. And maybe that provided a fun shoot, but doesn't necessarily translate into a funny film. It just feels like Judd Apatow firmly making content for Netflix, which is something that seems like the antithesis of what he's been doing for most of his career at this point.
Yeah, and I think that it's just disheartening because it feels like, he wasn't involved with Tropic Thunder, but I think that he wanted to make his own like Tropic Thunder, Bullfinger-esque Hollywood comedy, and it just didn't work. And I think one of the big reasons for that is because whether it was Netflix or him, they didn't put enough cerebral focus on the actual stuff they were satirizing, to where it just comes across as lazy. Like the Cliff Beast stuff feels like, I think somebody noted that it looks like the Asylum stuff. Like these are not actual movies that people would watch. Like these things are very overly stupid. And it's like the brilliance of Tropic Thunder is that you could believe every single thing in that. While they're a little over-aggrandized, like these are real things, especially the spoof that Robert Downey Jr. and Tobey Maguire were doing, of the Oscar bait type thing. Like these are very believable things that were satirizing, and it's just, there was so much more intelligence and effort put into the actual joking. And if I feel like that in this film, they just took so much stock in the fact that they had a smart premise to them. And then whether Netflix was like, we can't spend this much money on, you know, the stuff you're making fun of, or it was Apatow being like, I just want to make this really cheap and shoddy to like underscore how stupid I think all of this is. It just doesn't play well. And I think it kind of detracts from what they're trying to do, because if what you're making fun of is so ludicrously off base that the satire doesn't connect, and you're already in a situation where the script is so inane and not really finding much humor in what it's trying to do outside of thinking itself is funny for what it's doing in the first place, there's just no movie. And I don't think this movie is like a quote-unquote disaster, as much as I think it is just very bland. And I think that's what's disappointing, is it's just like, there are these little moments where it's like trying to do something else. Like I think you were talking about, like, it tries like edge to be weird or dark or whatever, but then it just like completely falls back on itself into just something very just rote and sitcom-y. And I feel like that
it's very tropey.
Yeah, it is very tropey. And there's just no, like, the characters don't have much depth. There's just not like a central person you can really connect to. Like, it's just a very goofy misfire for someone who has never tried to make a movie like this. Because what I love about Apatow's films is they're very central, they're very low key for having such big casts, but they're very human driven. And like all of his movies, the characters are deep, and you don't always like the characters, but you're not always supposed to, because there's like that evolution they go on, and it's like there actually is strong character work. And in this film, it just was staggeringly off, because one thing I feel like Apatow has always understood, even in like a movie like This Is 40, is like he has empathy for the things that his characters are going through. But there is an empathy in his work to where it's like, even when Amy Schumer's character, who's kind of like the problematic person who goes on the life journey, it's like the movie is
Trainwreck, right?
Yeah,
it's Schumer. I thought that you were talking about This Is 40. Sorry.
Oh no.
Okay, sorry.
But like the even that character, it's like there's always been an empathy in his films for just what people are going through, and life. The movies never really end up in a place where there's like that much resolution. It's kind of like life. Like, it's messy. You figure it out. You don't have everything figured out necessarily, but you make do. And I've always admired that his films take such a realistic approach, but this is just flubber. I mean, there's just nothing. It just bounces around and makes weird noises and doesn't do anything. It's just a waste of time.
Well, I wish it was Flubber, because I feel like Flubber is a more entertaining film, though I haven't seen that film in quite a long time. But I will say that I agree with you. I feel like none of his other films have been cynical in this particular way.
Yeah,
like, there is a innate empathy from his other films that I feel like is crucially and weirdly lacking from this film. And that can be fine if you want to lean into it, because like you said, there are moments in this film where he seems to allow himself to get weirder or meaner with the commentary, but those moments are fairly fleeting, and it makes for a largely sort of shapeless and therefore dull film. It doesn't seem like he's really saying anything specific. He just feels like he's just kind of throwing everything at the wall and seeing what might stick. And even if stuff doesn't stick, he's like, well, what can you do? Got to move on to the next scene. And yeah, just he's basically leaving all these actors out to dry, and a lot of them are, as we mentioned, very talented. I think they can certainly hold their own in a better version of this film. I don't think we mentioned that Karen Gillan is the lead in the film, and I think certainly she could be a tremendous Apatow lead in a better, more focused film, but she's just kind of playing a fairly two-dimensional character who is, not really specific to any particular one actress, it seems like, but it doesn't really seem like there's much to her character at all, really. It's just sort of like a young actress who is aging out of a certain type of young actress mode, who is returning to a franchise that has defined her career for most of her life, and, going on the verge of insanity. And you can do stuff with that, but it just doesn't seem like Apatow is really pulling his punches, or it seems like he is pulling his punches. I mean, he's like, just seems like he doesn't really know what he wants to say, or if he does know what he wants to say, he doesn't want to say it. And it's like, well, if you're not going to say that, you're not going to do that, then what are we really doing here? We're just kind of wasting everyone's time, unfortunately. And yeah, it's just kind of a shame in that respect. I wish we had more to say about it, but it's just like, it just feels like a big missed opportunity. And if, I admire Apatow for trying something somewhat different than his modus operandi, but this was a unfortunate misfire. And I hope he would go back to doing, like we said, something that amplifies another comedian's voice, but allows them to flourish through his style. Certainly, I think I said to you, I saw someone suggest he make a Mulaney movie, and I feel like that'd be perfect for him, kind of talking about his recent battles, if Mulaney felt comfortable doing so in the Apatow way. Seems like a perfect thing for him to do right now, but I don't think that's what really interests him at the moment. I think he is already attached to write and direct This Is 50, a sequel to Knocked Up and This Is 40, which, I mean, I guess it's going to be more personal than this for sure, but I mean, I don't know if anyone... So. I think only Judd Apatow is asking for that film. So, I don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, I feel like his other two films, they're better and more creatively inspiring, but they probably were more challenging to make. And I think, especially with the pandemic going on, I think he probably wanted to make something with either his friends and family or people that he hasn't collaborated with previously, and wanted something that wasn't as challenging as his previous films, but that doesn't make the work any better, unfortunately.
No. And I think at the end of the day, like, he just, it's just a clean, like, whiff. I mean, I think he really tried to do something different, and, he just really stuck his neck out there and was like, I'm going to go to Netflix and do this because I know that I'm going to be able to do whatever the hell I want, and get all these people that I think would be funny to put together and just do it. And just not care, and just try to just do something silly and dumb, and and I'm sure it was fun to make. Like, I'm sure everyone had a great time on set. Like, I'm sure it was a fun atmosphere, but it just doesn't connect. And there's just such a, I think it's his worst edited film by far too, because there is just such an incoherence in the story. Like, it's just because the whole movie is about the shoot and they go random days, but the movie never hits a stride. Like, there's never a point where it's just like, oh, maybe they're starting to do something here. It's just so slapdash and just kind of put together without a lot of thought. And, I mean, obviously it's a movie. People are always working hard, and there's always more thought than you're willing to give credit for. But I don't think this is going to be one of the movies that, when we're looking back on art that came from the pandemic, that we're putting a spotlight on, except to say that this is what maybe you shouldn't have made out of your pandemic experience. Yeah.
But yeah, I do agree, because that ties into a thing that you mentioned earlier that I wanted to tie back to, which is that if he is going to make a parody of these franchise things, certainly like with this Cliff Beast 6 thing, like, there's a way of doing it where you can either acknowledge that the franchise is losing its way because of the shoot, where it's like, as the film progresses, like, it starts off with like impressive special effects, but as it goes along, the effects get more and more shoddy and overbearing and all this stuff. And there's a way you can do that in a clever way, or you can acknowledge that, like, the film itself is low budget and you can do like that kind of same thing. But yeah, I don't know, it just seems like it doesn't feel true to the making of films like this, and it doesn't feel accurate to what the experience is either. So, like I said, I don't really know what we're doing here. It's not funny enough to justify itself. It's not insightful enough. It doesn't feel true to the industry enough to warrant this type of project. And yeah, it just feels like another film that is going on to the Netflix server, and it's probably going to be forgotten in the course of a month or maybe two.
Its bubble will pop pretty soon.
There you go. Before we play Rotten Tomatoes game, were there any performances that stood out to you, good or bad, in this film?
Yeah. This one guy I'd never really... Guz Khan is a British comedian, impressionist, and actor.
The guy with the beard?
Yeah, he's not in the movie much, but it's so interesting. I've never heard of him before, but he came out apparently against the Jurassic World when it came out, because he felt that the film used a slang term against Pakistani people, that I guess they were trying to use a slang term for a dinosaur in the film, and they accidentally used, I guess, the slang term for Pakistani people.
Oh, I think I vaguely remember this now.
Yeah, and he like tried to boycott the movie, and like you know, it kind of tried to like bring awareness to the fact that the movie was like inadvertently using this racial slur, which is really interesting because now he's like finding himself in a position where he's making fun of the Jurassic World franchise. So maybe that's kind of an interesting little roundabout thing. I just now I'm reading that. That's fascinating.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
But I really like. He didn't really have any good material at all. But but I could see him being really good in a different movie. Like I think I liked his energy, and I think that he's got something going there. I just don't know. This is not it, but maybe he'll find something down the road. But that's like the one performance in this that I actually thought was interesting. From like I've never heard of this guy before, and I'm kind of curious to see what he'll do after this. Mm-hmm. But you know, obviously, the bubble is not going to be his breakout.
I don't imagine so. There are two performances that stood out to me for somewhat different reasons. The first was a guy named Harry Trevolian. He played Gunther, the assistant guy. And I don't think his performance is necessarily funny, but it feels like he's putting more interest than everyone else around him in a way that I feel like he was giving more to this movie than any other actor really was. And I'm curious to see if he's going to get attached to a better project in the future. It all seems like he's more of a dramatic actor, so I kind of appreciate him doing something this openly goofy. And the other performance that stood out to me was David Duchovny, in the sense that I feel like he wasn't ever really sold on this whole thing. Like, not to say that his performance is outright bad, but it just seems like he's just kind of like in it maybe like 45, 50%. But like, I feel like his weird sort of passiveness to this project highlighted how absurd some of the lines were, and therefore it made some of his dialogue funnier, I think, as a result. For instance, there's one line I think I told you already where he's talking to Leslie Mann, who has he's had an on and off fling with for decades. They have an adopted son together, and he was just like, I'm sorry I missed your mom's funeral to attend the People's Choice Award. And the way that he delivers that line in a rather kind of jaded, apathetic sort of way got a good sizable chuckle out of me. And I feel like he is one of the few bright spots in otherwise sort of listless, dull movie. And I don't want to commend him for giving a sort of half-assed performance, it feels, but I also feel like that he comes out of this looking better than most of the other actors inadvertently at the same time. So those are two performances that stood out to me, at least.
Yeah, and I hope Karen Gillan gets an actual big comedy.
Oh, for sure, me too.
Because she's really good in Duel, which comes out this month.
Agreed.
And I really like her as an actress, so I hope that she gets more to do elsewhere that's not Guardians of the Galaxy.
I agree. So let's play. You've played the Rotten Tomatoes game with us before, right?
I have.
All right. Have you looked up the Rotten Tomatoes score for this?
I have, but I'm not 100%.
Okay.
I think I might know it, but I don't know if I'm right or not.
Well, do you have a guess?
26?
You're pretty close. It is, as of now, 23%.
Okay, 23. Okay.
Critical consensus: meandering and mostly unfunny, The Bubble gums up an all-star cast with hackneyed gags about show business and the pandemic life. So, not a critical hit. Certainly the lowest of Judd Apatow's directorial career. But what about audiences? How do you feel they are responding to this film?
That I don't know. I would say 45.
Not too off the mark. It's actually 35% at this current moment. So yeah, audiences likewise not really jiving with this film. I can't blame them. it's, not really something I feel like anyone can really connect with, unfortunately, outside of, maybe those in the know. But even they, I feel like, aren't really going to be receptive to this film. Also, I kind of feel like there's a lot here, like I said, that isn't really specific. Like, there's like 4 separate dance scenes in this film that just are like, why do we have like 4? Why is this movie going on for 126 minutes? What do we need to do?
It's a whole lot of TikToking going on.
Yeah. Which felt like, why didn't they just like delete those scenes and put them on TikTok to promote the movie? Like, I don't know. Whatever. Anyway, to wrap this up, do you know the Letterboxd average score for The Bubble?
No, 2.1.
Really, really close, man. It is 2.0.
Oh, wow. Off by
So you did a good job. Yeah.
Fair enough. I'll take it. Thanks.
All right. Yeah. So unlike Judd Apatow, we're going to wrap this up in a agreeable time, at least by our standards. Corey, thank you so much for being willing to go the extra mile that John was not willing to, which is finishing this film and discussing it.
Appreciate it.
Sure. I imagine we'll discuss another film at another time. What that will be remains undetermined, but you'll find out, dear listener, soon enough. So I'm going to say with that, I bid you adieu.
Have a good one.